You'd see like 3 food trucks would pull up and thousands of people would just suddenly try to climb on the food truck. And I was on top of the food truck and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get down and drone this because these guys are going to tip the food truck.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 136. Can drones be used to help us understand what happens in war zones and conflict areas? If you ask today's guest, she would offer a resounding yes. Gail Orenstein has been a global photojournalist and a documentary photographer for 25 years. She's originally from Mystic, Connecticut, but has lived in London for 20 years now. Her work has taken her to over 71 countries. Some of them are the most conflicted regions in the world, including Syria, Iraq, Eastern Ukraine, Central Africa, and Central America. Her photos have been published extensively around the world. In 2016, Gail started using drones to cover stories of conflict areas. She quickly learned the power of drones to capture and tell compelling stories, and she made the full transition from photojournalist to dronelist. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Gail talks about her 25-year history as a photojournalist, how she began using drones, and how the technology has opened a new passion for telling stories. Now, before we hear from Gail, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to patreon.com/drone radio show to join the team. Now let's learn how drones are used to cover conflict areas with Gail Ornstein. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Gail to introduce herself.
My name is Gail Orenstein, and I am a drone journalist. I work globally, and I was a photojournalist for 25 years. And I last year decided to become a drone pilot and went through some quite intensive training in the United Kingdom. And after 25 years of shooting, I just saw a lot of newscasts using drone footage. And it really just clicked. I thought, wow, this is just, I can't believe that I'm still in the field and living to see the other possibilities of how conflict journalism can be brought into the news world.
Gail, tell us about your background in photojournalism.
I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and back in the 80s, when I was in Chicago, I used to go to Central America a lot. I used to go to prisons there. I started really just hanging out in prisons in Guatemala and Nicaragua and all over the place. I was very fascinated with the prison culture there. And I went back and forth. And then I started getting assignments early on in my career. And then I just probably from 1982 to around 1992, I went back to school to get my master's degree. And then I decided, that I wanted to move to Europe because by that point, 10 years into my career, I was shooting a lot around Eastern Europe. And it took a long time and it was hard to get to. And I was really exhausted a lot. So we moved to London and we decided that was going to be our base. So it made my life a lot easier.
25 years ago, when you were in Nicaragua and South America, those places weren't very safe. How did you negotiate all of that?
Well, first of all, I didn't go to South America. I stayed in Central America. I was based primarily in Guatemala. Yes, of course, there was a lot of photojournalists in Colombia and many in all over South America. I, at that time, was not into frontline journalism. I was much more into hardcore, edgy documentary photography. Going into prisons, going into, brothels, any sort of kind of hardcore, edgy parts where I could find society wasn't being covered. And I found that to be much more interesting than going straight to war, because I wasn't quite sure when I was that young that I was that prepared. In 1982, I also took a trip to Israel. And I took, of course, my film camera, my first Nikon, and I jumped on the back of a truck, and it was a military truck. And the Israeli driver was about to cross into Lebanon. And I thought, I better get the hell off the back of this truck, because all I have is a bag of black and white film and one camera, and I'm not really prepared as a war photographer yet to quite go to the front line. So I had many opportunities, and there weren't many women, certainly at that time, doing that.
So when did you enter conflict areas as a journalist?
Well, the first time I felt that I was actually not necessarily in combat, but in much more of a conflict area was when I went to Haiti, and Baby Doc had just left. And there was a lot of military around, and it was pretty dangerous. I had actually encountered quite a few moments where I got myself into trouble. For example, there's a ceremony called the Ra-Ra, and I was there during that time, and it's like a voodoo ceremony. And really, I went around photographing that. But the thing is, when I went to do that, I was harassed a lot because I hadn't really asked permission. And I thought, I really needed to start thinking about my environment more. And I just really smartened up. And I think I learned a lot in Haiti. I learned a lot that if this was how I was going to confront people, wanting to document them in a situation of whether they're celebrating something that I'm unfamiliar with or whether they're at war, then I better take a step back and think about how to do this. Because I grew up in a family that was, we all got along, there were no problems. And, I wasn't really used to conflict, but yeah, I was sort of turning to more and more as I get older, much more conflictual situations.
What's been your most rewarding experience as a photojournalist?
I was a big fan of the Peter and David Turnley when they were the Pulitzer Prize winner. I studied them, and the one thing that really struck me is they're very helpful on the field. And a lot of times, people think that you're sort of there on the ground and you're in a conflict situation and you're seeing the worst of people. But that tends to, in my case, I would hope for many other conflict photographers, that tends to bring the best out in me. Recently, when I was in Bangladesh and on the border of Myanmar, there was just such heavy monsoons and such flooding, things like that. You really need to help. You need to help people. You need to put your equipment down sometimes, and there's just such dire situations. You need to really do that. I think a good photojournalist is someone who's of pretty darn good character and not just poking their lens around in people's, dire straits.
When did you start taking an interest in drones?
Actually, CNN about a year and a half ago droned Kobani, and I had just gotten back from Syria. And I thought, wow, if I had had that drone when I was in Syria, I would have seen the world so differently. Because when I looked at that video, I saw the world so differently. I saw so much more of the destruction from Daesh. I saw so much more of the bigger picture than when I'm doing it on the ground. It's so much more difficult, I think, for me, now that I've droned these conflict situations. I can't even imagine going without a drone now. I don't think I would. One, for safety reasons, but two, because you really do, as a drone journalist, you really do get a bigger picture of what to survey, where areas that opposition forces might not necessarily be able to guide you to. There's so much more to see than obviously if you just have your DSLR.
Are drones used to augment what you do on the ground? Or have they become their own unique media?
That's interesting. It's become a bit of both. One example, I use it as a safety mechanism now, whereas before I look at a lot of my footage and things, photographs, and I think, wow, that is a really vulnerable situation. If I had my drone, I would have surveyed that area first, because when you're running around, you're in so much destruction all the time. You're jumping over wires, you're jumping through buildings, you're running incredibly fast. One thing people don't realize, they're like, oh yeah, that's, wow, that's such a cool thing. Well, you have to be extremely fit, because a lot of times when you're with these media guys, they're running like hell from building to building. And I find now, if I can survey an area, I'm writing a book, it's called Droning Through Wires. And one of the reasons is because I never realized until I had my drones, just how complicated the situation is on the ground, until I started looking through the aerial footage. And I started really thinking, you know what, when I revisit this, I'm not going to go that way, because look at all these down lines. So it's like having a third eye. It's just a great POV.
What are the challenges of actually flying a drone in a conflict area? I mean, do you have to worry about somebody shooting it down?
Well, interestingly enough, when I first started droning at the beginning of the year, I went to Iraq a lot. And I had my DJI Phantom impounded because I didn't have the correct paperwork. But then I was at the time able to fly into Erbil. And I also brought my Parrot. I just thought, you know what, I had a Bebop 2. I'm just going to bring it, see how easy it is to fly it around. I know the situation. I know there's wires everywhere. Grids are down. Pylons are everywhere. So they impounded that, and I actually didn't even go back to get it for a couple of days. I just said, I need to just get out on the field, just start droning. And I just used my Parrot so much, I didn't really go back to get the bigger one until like a week later. I was covering eastern Mosul and the plains of Nineveh and the Assyrian Christians are. And there was just so much destruction. And I have to tell you, the Parrot, although the camera doesn't pivot down, yes, that's true, it was great for surveying at the time. I was very glad to have the Mavic and be able to bring that and get a very different camera perspective. But when I took a small Parrot out, it was really great. It was great to drone and just get a feel of droning around so much destruction.
Any issues with the local government forces? I mean, you are carrying around a drone.
Well, the thing is, you constantly have to go through checkpoints. So often I would show, as I'm going through checkpoints, I do tend to pull out my drone. I let everyone look at it. I don't want it to be something hidden that's going to be impounded while I have just traveled really far into a particular area like Mosul or wherever there may be some heavy fighting going on. And so by the time I get there, I'm working on the ground with the military. So they've seen it. Anyone who's interested in drone journalism, I wouldn't recommend somebody decide to suddenly fly to Iraq, not have any papers, decide, okay, this is lawless. I can pretty much get away with anything I want. I mean, it is to some degree, but at one point, somebody is going to see that drone, and you better make sure that you have at some point had your proper paperwork done.
What does a drone give you that you didn't have before?
It has provided an aerial perspective I never had before. I used to be able to have to climb to the top of these buildings in order to see what the hell was going on down on the ground. There's a photograph of me when I was in Kobani, and there were a lot of snipers on the other side. And the YPG, the People's Protection Unit for the Kurds, are taking my equipment off and guiding me down a ladder. And I just thought, if I had my drone at that time, I could have really seen what was going on. no one could argue yes, and then the sniper would have blown the crap out of your drone. But sure, you could always make that argument that there's going to be somebody that will target you. I haven't been hit by, touch wood, by a sniper yet with a drone, but I absolutely could see that happening, sure.
You mentioned that the drone gives you a perspective of the damage or the physical implications of the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But has it given you any greater perspective of the social issues or the impacts on humanity?
Bingo, you just really hit the nail on the head, because I just got back from the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh, and with the Rohingya crisis. And wow, you read about it. Okay, hundreds of thousands are crossing from Rakhine State into Bangladesh. You read about it, but until you're there, droning it and surveying it and piloting it, anywhere you go in that small area, you're trying to get a survey, and people, they're curious. You got hundreds of people around you. So you do want to pilot safely, but you have to find a place where the monsoon hasn't flooded an area. So you really get a sense of just how enormous. When I started droning on the border, that's when I thought, holy shit, this is just a humanitarian nightmare. This isn't even just a crisis. This is a nightmare. You've got flooding, you've got environmental issues, you've got humanitarian issues, you've got waste, you've got everything possible. And I just kept looking at the footage over and over. Whereas definitely I would have done that with my photos. And I would have, in a sense, sort of put my photographs next to each other and built a story around it, and done that with still footage. But when you have aerial footage and you have such a massive amount of idea what's going on the ground, it feels quite overwhelming. At times, in fact, when I was in Bangladesh and I was doing the work with the Rohingya, I had to stop at times because I felt the technology was taking over, because I kept droning, because I felt like this is just so overwhelming. I have to just find a place to drone and get out of here. Because often when I had gone there, I went on the early stages and there weren't that many NGOs there yet. So you'd see 3 food trucks would pull up and thousands of people would just suddenly try to climb on the food truck. And I was on top of the food truck and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get down and drone this, because these guys are going to tip the food truck. And I went down and I droned it. So I have footage from my Leica on top of the food truck, and then getting off the food truck, and then just droning it. And it's amazing seeing the difference.
Has using drones changed the way you plan for a story?
From a safety perspective, as I'm shooting now, and I'm a bit, I'm older now, and I'm thinking, when I was in my 20s and 30s and stuff, and my 40s, I was okay with being in the heart of, pulling and pushing, and really you get sort of, as a photojournalist, for me, I never really shot with anything except a 14 millimeter fixed lens. So when I was learning how to shoot, I was always taught, you get in the thick of things and you shoot and you feel the emotion, and then it sort of perpetuates itself through the images because you're with the people. See, if you're shooting with a long lens, you're at a distance. You can't really feel the situation. So I was always shooting with a short fixed lens, always. I never, ever used a long lens. So this is very different technology for me, droning. Sometimes, as I said, when I was in Bangladesh, there were times I said, okay, I got to get back close to the people, and I put the drone away. It allows me to have the emotions that I have as a photojournalist being around such a chaotic environment. But then it also allows me to take a break from that, because I never used to be able to take a break from that. And I'm a very, very high energy person. So wherever there's people, that are struggling in that environment, I'll just have the auto rickshaw or the wherever I am, take me there. I want to go there. But this allows me to sort of flip and say, well, I can just walk a few feet back and just drone it. So it doesn't seem so hectic for me. It seems like now I have a choice.
Now, when you're piloting the drone, is there ever a danger of becoming so drawn into the scene or the situation that you forget that you're there to chronicle the event?
Not really, because I've been doing it so long that I think, that now with the drone, it's something I'm able to, it's just very different. I have just such a very different experience.
So maybe your years of training and experience as a photojournalist automatically kick in to keep you detached.
Yeah, I think the downside about the technology is that when I'm droning, yeah, sure, I do get lost in it. And I just think, oh my God, I can't believe as I'm surveying the new tent city, just how bloody far it goes. I mean, and I feel overwhelmed, and then I want to drone more and more. And then, after you do that for a few hours and go to a few places, then you realize, it is a wonderful technology. You really do provide information to NGOs. You can provide to news organizations just how critical help is needed, just how immense destruction is. But sometimes you just want to really just take your camera and go in. So for new people starting out, be careful not to get just so into the overwhelmed with the drone technology, because then you sort of miss the emotion of the on-the-ground crisis.
Drone journalism is a pretty new area, but isn't all journalism the same? Or do you look at drone journalism as being somehow different than journalism itself?
Well, for me, I look at it completely different, because when I'm droning now, I always did think of ways as a photojournalist, I can help these people, some refugees, help them cross over or lift some things, carry some things. But now I sort of see it like, wow, man, wouldn't that be cool if I had an extended arm? Because ProDrone is doing this really cool thing where they're adding different arms to pick up things. So now I'm thinking, like, can you imagine if I had an extra arm on my Mavic Pro and I could just drop some food? Now I'm starting to think in ways of how the drone that I'm using could actually have a major impact on the people right there now at that moment.
What do you enjoy most about using drones in the field?
I enjoy most seeing what I have missed for so many years. I realize now that when I was documenting as a photographer, just how much I missed in terms of the big picture, in terms of getting the full story, in terms of seeing what is going on the ground. When you're running around you're running around buildings and for a few hours, you get the picture. But wow, when you're droning, you really get the picture. And that, I think, is something, in hindsight, if I look back, I really wished I had a drone 20 years ago, because I used to be so confident as a photojournalist, like, okay, I'm on the ground. Yes, okay, I see these opposition forces. I see what's going on, blah, blah, blah. But wow, when you're droning that area, you really get such a vast picture of what's going on. I don't feel that I got that carrying my DSLR around.
Where do you think this will take you? What do you hope to accomplish with drones in journalism?
I'm not trying to make this a gender issue, but I'm still seeing droning in the field done by male teams. So for one thing, I do hope that young females become interested in droning conflict zones. I think that would be really great. But other than that, and I'm not going to go on about that, but I do think that is really important for young women to become involved, or older women, whoever it is, just females in general. It would be nice to see some really start droning in these areas, because most of the victims are women and children. certainly there's male victims, of course, but when you go to the camps, women and children are there. So it would be really great to start having a lot of women start learning how to drone in these environments. The second thing is, I'm really hoping that drone journalism can become part of, instead of just the news field, that it becomes part of some kind of addendum to a relief sort of work. As I said, when I drone now, I think about relief drops. How, as a drone pilot in a conflict zone, can I not only survey it and gather the news and see the conflict on the ground and show the footage, but how can I learn to be able to help those in immediate need? Because drones are really built for a huge change in the relief effort area. And I see just how desperate it's needed.
What advice would you give to someone that wants to go into conflict areas as a drone journalist?
Always have a camera on you and switch back and forth, see what you like, and feel very lucky that you can use a drone. I think they should, first of all, before you go to a country, always know their drone rules and regulations, because it varies from place to place. And it depends how deep the conflict is, and it changes all the time. So obviously, if you're starting out, you should have the knowledge of what's going on in that environment. Have your paperwork prepared, have your press credentials ready, no matter what it is, whether you're just taking a camera or a drone, especially a drone. I would, in particular, recommend a smaller drone. I use my Mavic. It folds. It's wonderful. I also bring my Parrot because, I have 3 or 4 drones I bring, but I don't bring any big drones anymore. I'm in a fortunate situation where I can now, at this point, afford quite a few drones. So I bring a lot of small drones, because if one gets shot down, that's okay. It's not going to stop me from working. So this may take some new drone journalists time to build up, but, get 2-3 Parrots, get out there, and don't go with a $4,000 drone and, think that it might not be impounded or it might not be shot down. Start small.
Is there anything specific that you would add to encourage women journalists to go into conflict areas with drones?
I think you have to be very careful, but I think because we're seeing many of the victims are women and children, I think that women drone pilots, if you're a female, is going to give a very different perspective. But I don't know. I just think it's something that women have been beaten out in technology. Let's face it, in technology, women have been at a disadvantage. And I don't think that there's anything to even argue about that. I think that this is a technology if we could be in the forefront of. But, I just don't want to see women lose out. I think we lost out big in technology, in IT, and I really hope to see a lot of females. It's a difficult environment to be in. I think you have to do a lot of practice in difficult droning areas before you go into a conflict zone.
Is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
One thing that's really important to think about, if you're going to do this, you have to realize that the association of a drone for most civilians in a conflict area have a very negative connotation. They are used they're weaponized. Things could be absolutely horrific. I know when I was in Kobani, it was getting hit really hard with American drones. And it felt at time like literally the earth was lifting up and then dropping down. So a lot of people experience drones in war, just in conflict situations. They have never seen anything good about them. They've just been horrific. So most of the pictures that people have of me, I noticed a lot of people that have posted, is when I've actually been just showing refugees, what the hell is this thing? How is it that this is not a weapon? How is it used differently? And I would recommend that to anybody. Just take a moment, take the bloody drone out of the bag, and just let people touch it. Let people see it. I'm not saying don't be safe. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, when you're in a position of responsibility like that, where you could really frighten people, I think you have a responsibility and you owe it to people who've been under such distress and such duress. You owe it to them to just take a minute and say, you know what, look at this, and here's the camera, and this is what I'm going to be doing. Oftentimes, when kids see me, they'll run like hell when they see it in my hand. And I'll be like, hang on a minute, come here, come and look at this. This is really cool technology. And, I think the ability to be able to teach that drones are not just weapons is 100% critical to being a really good drone journalist.
What have you learned through the last 25 years of photojournalism?
I think the thing is that because I came from a very privileged family, one thing I did was that I for me, there was an opposition to that. There was this need to sort of get away from, I grew up in Connecticut, in Mystic, Connecticut, in a sort of very, as I said, very privileged part of Connecticut. And I sort of had a reaction to that. I sort of always was hunting around and looking for subcultures to kind of be with. So for me, it was, I guess, a reaction to growing up around people who were very affluent, but not necessarily paying attention to, how lucky they were, or even, thinking about things like that. So for me, it's had a profound effect. I've gotten every single thing I've wanted, really. I've gotten to hang out with the most amazing people in the world who are marginal people that most people just really don't usually want to hang out with or want to be with. And I've documented them throughout my life. And I felt that's been amazing to be able to sit in my studio and look at prisoners from 25 years ago that I was with in Guatemala, Nicaragua, just looking through my work, my body of work. It's been pretty amazing.
Any challenges?
Pretty lonely at times because when you're in the field, it can get quite lonely too, because even though you're around so many people, there's so many moments where you're just thinking like, wow, how do you even begin to tell a story like that? And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, I have these great photos and this footage, but really, I think in situations like this, until you do it, you never realize just how powerful it is. Like for me, I'm alone in my studio often, and I keep looking at footage, and I think, wow, I can't believe I did that 10 years ago, or I can't believe I did that 5 years ago, or even 25 years ago. It's a lot of reflecting on my life, and being a woman, especially. Most of the time, I always encountered other male photojournalists. Very rarely would I encounter female photographers.
And for my final question, Gail, how has this whole process been for you personally?
It's been an amazing journey, really. And adding drones to it has been just something I'm glad I'm alive to be able to have this new technology to experiment with. I think any young person starting out should consider themselves extremely lucky to be able to have camera and a drone. For so many years, I didn't have that. And I really wish I did. It's phenomenal being able to see a conflict in such a vast way. It changes the way that you see the world. And oftentimes I find myself feeling overwhelmed just how far the technology can take me now. I couldn't do that before.
That's it for episode 136 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Gail Orenstein and learning how drones are used in conflict areas. I want to thank Gail for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Gail's work or want to connect with her, check out her website at gailorenstein.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to patreon.com/Drone Radio Show. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.